YouTube, as well as SlideShare. Today's meetup format, we'll basically spend the majority of the hour going through a recap of 2020 and reInvent around AWS releases. Feel free to ask any questions throughout or interact through the chime window. Right now, everyone is auto-muted, but you have the ability to both mute and unmute yourself. So with that said, let's go ahead and get started. So every year, our user group essentially does a recap of the major announcements at AWS reInvent. For those who aren't aware, that's AWS's annual conference, and up until 2020 was done in person in Las Vegas. Since going virtual last year, it's afforded some great new opportunities, both from an accessibility perspective, as well as a timeline perspective. So what normally is pushed into about 1 week has the ability now to stretch 3 weeks in December, and then a little bit under a week in January, both live and on-demand virtual events. What's great about going virtual is, per the prospectus, estimated 250,000 attendees were to interact, participate, or engage in one way or the other. That's about 3 to 4 times the number of attendees that would typically show up in person at the prior year reInvent. One other statistic I found somewhat interesting, straight from the announcement page for 2020 reInvent, there were 145 announcements. That number both seems high and low at the same time. So obviously, I'll bore everyone to death if I try to talk about 145 announcements. So I thought what I do is curate it and categorize it based on the interests of our user group and aligned to some of the topics we've covered in the past. More so, having it in February gives us a chance to sort of digest and ingest all the great new stuff that's come out in December and in January. More so, one of the problems that I often run into, and I think the same is echoed by other folks, is so much is compressed in such a short period of time that we tend to forget a lot of the announcements that have led up. So as an exercise, in addition to kind of covering a lot of the announcements around reInvent, I'm also covering ones that we consider pretty significant throughout the year of 2020 that may have not necessarily gotten as much attention as the next cool thing. So with that said, we'll work through this in a bit of a logical order, out and in. So starting with Edge. So this is basically services that are hyper regionally available to us. Basically, edge networks, edge computing, services like CloudFront, Route 53, Lambda at Edge, and then the physical, which is introduced really over the past few years, right? So from an edge perspective, significant announcements around the availability of wavelength, which are essentially hyperlocal availability zones co-located on carrier 5G networks, right? So, sub 10-digit millisecond response time, as well as local zones, which again, like the closest availability zone to most of us from Florida is going to be North Virginia. However, now with local zones, we have access to, I believe actually one announced at reInvent was Miami or thereabouts. Again, low latency access to AWS resources. And then finally, for super low latency, we have outposts. Outposts were announced, I believe, 2 reInvents ago, and were typically delivered in, I believe, quarter, half, or full plus size racks. With this year's announcements, those are available in formats and configurations as small as 1 or 2U. You could literally keep it under your desk. And again, all 3 of these services, while not necessarily having the full suite of capabilities as you might find in a mature AWS region, typically carry some level of common service availability, such as EC2, RDS, EKS, ECS, and so on. Again, all API compatible with the same tools and technologies that you'd have working in any typical AWS region. So on the network edge side, some of the great new things added, and a lot of these ones were really throughout the year. CloudFront support for managing public keys from an URL signing perspective can now be done through an IAM user, eliminating the need to log in as root. Support for TLS 1.3, as well as Brotli compression, which achieves far more higher compression percentage rates than you'd find with gzip compression. One of the great things about CloudFront and its support for TLS 1.3 is it's just there, it just exists. So you basically get near perfect out-of-the-box security scores in terms of protocol support, key support, and cipher support without having to go through complicated configurations. On the Route 53 side, again, some features added throughout the year that are worth note. DNSSEC support, which was added towards the end of last year for signing DNS responses, as well as resolver query logging. So you can actually log the requests made to your internal resolvers. So moving further out from the edge to sort of the regional network VPC layer, a ton of new capabilities added, which to me is pretty amazing. VPC tended to be pretty feature complete. However, as you see, there's a whole page full of new features added, both at the end of last year and throughout the year. From the VPC perspective, the ability to create prefix lists for ease of management of security groups. Reachability analyzer, so when you can't figure out why your traffic doesn't go from point A to point B, you could actually leverage a reachability analyzer, and it will go step by step through each of your routes, your VPC route tables, transit gateways, etc., to understand exactly the route it's taking and where it may be failing. Customizable reverse DNS, which typically has applications in mail gateway type use cases. And then on the VPN side, for IPsec VPNs, a number of new capabilities added, increasing AWS's IPsec service compatibility with third-party devices. Long awaited, it's been IKE initiation from the AWS side, so you no longer need to initiate IPsec traffic from the far side, the customer side or data center side. Client VPN has an official client, as well as SAML authentication-based support, and further allows for both split tunneling and client-to-client connectivity. Direct Connect just added 100 gig connectivity, as well as failover testing, so you can actually test or simulate the failure of a physical direct connect connection and validate that your failover works as expected. From the transit gateway side, actually, that should say IGMP. Support's been added for Internet Gateway Messaging Protocol, as well as multicast support in additional regions. And then 2 new solutions to solving for firewall needs have been added. A new type of load balancer, which will support load balancing of firewall appliances that support the Genevieve protocol, as well as an AWS managed network firewall. The network firewall functions similarly to essentially like NAT gateway. However, allows you to perform additional filtering using like the 5-tuple rule, port protocol source destination, allow or deny log. But in addition to that, of most interest and a common use case we run into is the support for allow listing or block listing based on FQDN or domain rather than IP address. So huge win here, especially in sort of removing, virtual appliance-based solutions you'd otherwise need to leverage. Traffic mirroring support's recently been added to certain non-Nitro instances. So you could literally mirror the packets for a particular ENI, subnet, or VPC. And then on the application load balancing side, support for not just ALB created cookies, but application created cookie stickiness has been added. Support for gRPC, as well as desync mitigation techniques. And then finally, this was actually an early announcement in 2020 that didn't seem to get a whole lot of coverage, but basically private link custom DNS support. This is a great use case for organizations on AWS that run SaaS platforms that they want to make available not just to their customers over the internet, but offer as an alternative to their customers who are also using AWS private VPC-based connectivity that doesn't require changing DNS, doesn't require implementing VPC peering or implementing transit gateway. It also deals with the common problem around IP address overlap when you're trying to allow multiple organizations with disparate IP space communicate privately within AWS. On the compute side, as is expected and anticipated, yet also surprising at each reInvent, is the addition of compute types. So some of the big announcements at reInvent this year were Graviton 2, which are ARM-based, CPU-powered EC2 instance types, and then new D3, M5, and R5 type instances. On top of that, earlier last year, live patching support for Amazon Linux 2 was announced. So essentially, you can patch an Amazon Linux 2 AMI live, the kernel included, without having to actually restart the instance. This is great for machines that have both availability requirements, but are not necessarily well suited for resiliency type models or auto scaling. I think everyone was pretty amped up to see that you could literally launch a Mac in AWS, basically as a piece of bare metal, enabled by the Nitro hypervisors. But alongside that, many of AWS's agents used for management of the instances, such as the CloudWatch agent, Systems Manager agent, etc., have added support for OS X. Even more interestingly enough, if you wanted to essentially manage your laptop as if it were an EC2 instance in Systems Manager, as an example, or code deploy, you could do exactly that. One of the most exciting ones I saw last year, this came out, I think about a month or so before reInvent, was a service add-on called Enclaves. And essentially what Enclaves allows you to do is launch a cryptographically signed compute instance within your EC2 compute instance, while at the same time not allowing any sort of connectivity from a network perspective. So highly secured, highly sensitive type of workloads benefit from this. One of the sort of common and accessible patterns that I think would benefit a lot of folks are you could essentially leverage enclaves to retrieve a certificate in key pair from Amazon Certificate Manager and make that available to Nginx running on that EC2 instance without necessarily exposing the private key to the file system. Tremendous value and capability and possibility in that. So on the storage side, much like instances, additional storage types were added. Some of the more interesting additions, again, earlier in the year, multi-attached support was added for IO 1 and 2 EBS storage types. So you could literally, for big data type workloads, cluster your EBS volumes to multiple hosts. And then on the S3 side, support for read after write consistency was added, which also then enabled true two-way replication between buckets. On the function side, so Lambda, support for container-based functions was added. So in addition to packaging your function and possibly even your runtime, as you may typically do, you could actually package them as containers, leveraging some of your additional deployment pipelines, as well as provide ease of use in local development and testing. Just prior to that, the ability to actually sign a function's package was introduced. So again, you could cryptographically attest that package has not been tampered with. An additional AWS service was actually added to support that. And then similarly, 1 millisecond billing was added. So basically, rather than bill you for every 100 milliseconds that the Lambda function is running, it bills you at the 1 millisecond. I've seen reports of near 80 to 90% savings with that. Earlier in the year, AVX2 support's been added for computationally intensive workloads, big data workloads, HPC workloads, and the like. And then extensions were added, which essentially provides sidecar type monitoring of Lambda functions. So when you think about how something like an application performance monitoring solution would work. As a matter of fact, alongside this announcement, support for OpenTelemetry through this monitoring of a Lambda function was added as well. And finally, on the container side, alongside the announcement late last year that Docker Hub will start throttling anonymous pull requests, AWS in response created the EC2, or sorry, that should actually say ECS public registry. So you could essentially create public repositories of your Docker images, much like you'd otherwise be doing on Docker Hub, for free without throttling. Really cool stuff. Just as exciting was ECS and EKS anywhere. So now, whether it's AWS, again, under your desk, your laptop, or a cluster of Raspberry Pis, you can orchestrate containers just the same via familiar ECS or EKS interfaces. Earlier this year, the AWS announced the both preview and then GA availability of a solution or platform or library called BottleRocket. Bottle Rocket is essentially a slimmed down operating system designed to run nearly on anything, specifically for the purposes of hosting containers. And alongside this, Fargate 1.4 was added, essentially leveraging the same concepts as Bottle Rocket to eliminate Docker as the daemon of choice and move to Container D. Essentially removing a lot of the redundancy and complexity that otherwise would have existed in both using Fargate with Docker-based daemon. Moving further upstream, or up the stack, on the database side, both Apache Airflow, managed Apache Airflow, and Amazon MQ were announced, as well as Aurora Serverless v2. And probably the two most exciting ones for me, Babelfish, which essentially is a wrapper that allows you to use Aurora Postgres for MS SQL-based clients. Great use case here for a lot of legacy Microsoft SQL workloads that you want to take advantage of the capabilities within Aurora, but don't necessarily want to go through changing your database platform, your code, your ORM, etc. And with that, long awaited was the release of TimeStream, essentially AWS's managed time series database service. I believe this was late September, early October that came out. Some really exciting stuff in the data analytics space. Heavy theme here was, of course, healthcare, being a lot of the research and development side of things coming out of last year. So a data lake specifically positioned for healthcare data. EKS support for EMR. And essentially the expansion of capabilities for both AWS Data Lake Service and Redshift, including Aqua. On the Glue side, a number of new features added throughout the year. Most interestingly has been Glue Elastic Views, which essentially allows you to aggregate data from a variety of different sources, as well as Data Brew, essentially an IDE for working with Glue. On the QuickSight side, both the addition of a variety of sources throughout the year. Most interestingly has been the ability to actually ingest Elasticsearch data into QuickSight, as well as advanced capabilities to embed QuickSight within other applications. This could be anything from a SaaS application that your organization's built, or even a company intranet. On the artificial intelligence side, a lot of focus went into actually extending AI or ML capabilities into existing data platforms, whether that was Neptune, Redshift, or QuickSight. QuickSight incidentally already had ML capabilities. Additional capabilities were added called QuickSight Q that essentially allows you to, using natural language, right, ask a question, get an answer, type interaction to actually query your data. Additional capabilities were added to Forecast specific to weather, so built-in data sets around weather. And Kendra, earlier in the year, Kendra is essentially think of it as a corporate intranet indexing plus knowledge search service was announced as GA. A lot of value here, not just in sort of the corporate space, right, integrating with file server, SharePoint, etc., but even in the contact space or contact center space, where you essentially want to give agents access to the most appropriate answer in the shortest amount of time. Kendra has a lot of possibilities there. And finally, on the Lex side, a lot of new capabilities were added to Lex last year. Most recently, the ability to essentially stream a conversation to Lex, whereas previously Lex was more based on invocations, basically provide voice, provide text, get a response, continue. You now can actually stream while maintaining that session. New interface was released for managing Lex. Variety of languages. I lost count. What started with English, I feel, at the beginning of last year, we're now up to, I believe it's about 5 languages. Context management, so the ability to basically keep the history of a particular Lex session and refer back to that information. The ability to create a custom slot that's based on regex. So if you are asking for something like a serial number that follows a certain pattern, you can actually validate that, map it to identify and map it as a slot within Lex. And then a variety of session parameters, particularly useful with integrating on the voice side with Amazon Connect, were added. That allow you to basically tune the silent detection window, the ability to quote unquote barge in, where you could cut Lex off if you already know the answer, and a few other functions like that. The other major item we saw with reInvent in the realm of AI was actually the introduction of AI for industrial. So not just one service, but 3 services announced and available in one form or fashion, specifically for these use cases. Panorama. Panorama is basically a development platform for the acquisition of industrial data, and then the application of AI to that. Lookout, which essentially comes in 3 flavors: vision, equipment, and metrics. Allows you to essentially use, as it sounds, computer vision to identify defects in manufacturing, to collect data or inventory information, and the like. And finally, Monitron. Monitron essentially is a turnkey industrial IoT solution. Literally go on Amazon.com and buy it being basically a gateway and 5 sensors, and attaching it to mechanical equipment. Pretty much set it up like you're setting up an Alexa device, and start collecting data. Has its own pre-built dashboards and tuning, and can be used for predictive maintenance. Based on vibrations, speed, and other factors determining if hardware in your plant is starting to fail, and allow you to proactively maintain it. So on the customer engagement side, Pinpoint, essentially a customer engagement platform that allows you to engage with your customers via a variety of channels. Has recently added, and SNS has recently added support for both 10-digit long codes and toll-free SMS numbers. The Chime SDK, I believe, I think it was announced reInvent 2019, essentially allows you to build your own Chime-based application programmatically. Has added support for both phone number, PSTN termination, voice applications. Basically, you can write anything in Lambda, and proxy phone sessions. So some of the really cool use cases you could do here, right, is in addition to basically build your own Chime like we're using tonight, you can build your own Uber-like calling platform, right? Where if you have consumer type app where you need to reach your customers without necessarily knowing their actual phone number, you can leverage the Chime SDK for that. We've seen applications in the healthcare space for that. And like I said, you could also essentially build your own Lambda-powered voice applications with Chime. So think like self-service IVRs, all entirely running in Lambda. Really cool. That came out right around Thanksgiving. And then finally, location service, essentially a new AWS service that allows you to do things like geolocation, geopinning, map tile generation, powered by one of AWS's partners here. The fun stuff, end user computing. So Workspace is an app stream. So around reInvent, both AppStream and Workspaces added support for real-time audio and video. Workspace is doing that through the Workspaces streaming protocol. But most exciting is actually the support for smart cards. Smart cards essentially basically a cryptographic signed card, physical card you may insert into your laptop or desktop that provides digital identity. So commonly found in government, other regulated industries. You can actually get the government of Estonia to issue you a personal one, which is pretty slick. But you can actually use that to log in to Workspaces without having to enter, your typical username, password, token type information. But more so, the smart card is mapped to the session as well. So any applications, websites, etc., that may be expecting that are usable as well within Workspaces. On the Workspaces side, the support to do cross-count, cross-region custom image sharing was added. Earlier in the year, the ability to actually perform upgrades of the operating system via migration. Image checking script to essentially bring your own image, bring your own license type situations, validate the quality of the image before importing. And probably one of the coolest things, aside from smart card support, is cross-region redirection. So now you could essentially make available in more than one region workspaces to your users. The redirection is based on Route 53 health check. You essentially maintain two workspaces registrations in separate regions, and based on the health check performed by Route 53, the client is then redirected to the appropriate region. That combined with a few other kind of AWS solutions, you can truly have a active, passive, multi-region failover solution for workspaces. On the contact center side, Amazon Connect is about to enter its, I believe, 4th year since being released. It was certainly a growth year last year. So a lot of the kind of, I'd call them minor yet significant capabilities added, we have on this side. reInvent 2019 added support for chat as an example. Last year, reInvent added support for Apple Business Chat, attachments, and even templates, right? Truly baked in, fully functioning chat solution in Connect. Slowly becoming API complete. You can now basically manage queues, quick connects, instances, contact flows, prompts, routing profiles, all via APIs. And more so, you can actually control call recordings, stop, start, pause through APIs as well. Mid last year, July, AWS's contact center QA solution powered by AI called Contact Lens became GA. And then later in the year, support for real-time was added. So with this, you could actually categorize and look for certain keywords in the conversations that your agents may be having with your callers, or the absence of certain words, length of conversation, over talking, and the like. And not just report out on that historically, but observe that in real time and take action. Additionally, more metadata has been added. So more information about the call, the source of the call, early media, so you can actually hear messages returned back from the carrier. And just last week, disconnect reason's been added, so you can understand if during a conversation, caller hung up first, agent hung up first, there's a latent technology issue that caused the call to disconnect. One of the more powerful things with this metadata is what AWS has announced at reInvent as Voice ID. Voice ID not GA yet in preview essentially allows you to voice pattern your callers. You could train it to recognize your callers and function as a form of caller authentication beyond you asking them certain questions or pieces of information. On the metrics side, a number of metrics were added in to allow measuring of what the connection time looks like to actually reach an agent, revamped search interface, and then on the contact flow side, the ability to basically manipulate and move contact flows, which basically describe the experience of the caller, copy and paste, and move them around, multi-select. Additional voices supported by Poly. And then new contact flows, right? Often asked for capability is, post-call survey. So when agents disconnected from the caller at the end of the call, actually routing the caller to a question and answer survey, right? From a customer satisfaction perspective, collect their response and their feedback. And then for our Amazon users that are based in South America, price decreases were announced for calling certain locations within South America, as well as the introduction of local numbers in 5 countries. So starting to be able to establish a bit of a footprint around Amazon Connect in South America as well. So some of the bigger announcements around Amazon Connect, mostly reInvent last year, but throughout the year as well. App integration, which lets you actually integrate Connect with AppSync and sync other sources of data to Amazon Connect. Tasks, which in addition to chat, provide yet another type of contact. And the cool thing about this is with chat exposed itself as an API. You could actually use that API to integrate with other channels, email, social, anything really. Though it was a little awkward because chat was designed to be really a multi-leg type conversation. So it leveraged things like stream WebSockets basically to stream that data. So it was a little awkward from an integration perspective. So with tasks rather, that goes away. You could basically use a pretty cut and dry API to essentially generate a contact type of a task, which is great for basically flagging social media posts or DMs that need to be responded back to through your contact center. Additionally, tasks allow linkage to other contacts. So if a customer service rep needed to actually create, say, a follow-up item, they could actually do that straight out of their interface and link it to the call. So again, a ton of capability there. Customer profiles, which allows basically pulling customer information out of the CRM and tagging it to the contact in Connect. Wisdom, which is a native knowledge-based integration into Connect. The general availability of Salesforce Service Cloud Voice. So if you're a Salesforce shop, you could basically provision Amazon Connect straight out of it without basically maintaining separate AWS account and using the out-of-the-box integrations. And finally, while not necessarily native, mid-year release was a voicemail solution, essentially leveraging a combination of Kinesis streams and Lambda functions to capture the streaming audio, write it to an S3 bucket, and function as basically a voicemail gateway. So on the enterprise side, basically additional capabilities in License Manager for entitlements. So you can basically pre-populate the licenses your organization has and allow your instances to basically pull from that and use that to maintain and track inventory of your enterprise licenses. App registry for service catalog, which allows you to actually publish out full apps versus CloudFormation templates and SSM documents. And a few cool things on the app dev side that enterprises most often run into. The first is, what do you do with that 2008 app that's now no longer officially supported or has patches? So AWS actually created a program. It's now GA. It's available to anyone, called End of Life Migration Program. And what it essentially does is allows you to suck up all the artifacts and create a package you could deploy to a newer, modern Windows OS. And while it's not necessarily functioning like hypervisor, leveraging virtualization or containerization, allows you to inject legacy libraries, legacy registry entries, and the like. So a lot of applications where straight up upgrading from 2008 onward wasn't feasible, EMP can provide support for. Similarly, so EMP is best suited for something that's like a service-based .NET app, or even older than that. For your web apps that are .NET or legacy-based, AWS actually has an app to container solution, as well as a porting assistant for .NET. App to container will basically suck in or ingest your application, .NET, Java, etc., and turn it into a nice little container. Porting assistant for .NET predominantly allows you to port your code to something more modern like .NET Core. On the integration side, support for AWS SFTP transfer for S3 has been extended to also support EFS, so you no longer need to leverage a copy task to copy from S3 data sync to EFS. AppFlow was announced, and a number of integrations for it came after. AppFlow essentially allows you to integrate A to B, so you can ingest data from your CRM, like ServiceNow, write it out to S3, rather than having to write an API to do the same. Great from a reporting perspective. And finally, Honeycode. I threw it under enterprise, but it's really a business tool. And essentially what it is allows anyone to simply build both desktop and mobile capable applications focused around data collection, data retrieval, and events. So think a lot of things that maybe are Excel table-based or otherwise, with some simple macros. Honeycode will actually allow users to build, integrate that with other data systems, and again make it available, from the mobile or desktop perspective. So on the management and security side, a ton of enhancements were added to Systems Manager. a lot of these also are renames, but essentially, allows you to manage your fleet of EC2 instances as a single unit. Allows you to perform changes in a planned manner, so change windows, etc. And then application manager, which goes up stack and allows you to manage the apps within those EC2 instances. On the personal health dashboard side, so a lot of the interesting AWS events, maintenance, etc., notifications that come through email also actually get emitted to the personal health dashboard. Generally are also more content rich than the AWS status page. So for those organizations that are leveraging a multi-account approach on AWS, you can now actually aggregate, not just through the API, but through the console, all of your individual account events. AWS SSOs added support for WebAuthn, so you can leverage one-time use code token type solutions, as well as leveraging SAML as identity sources. Previously, it was Active Directory, Enterprise Directory style sources. New security service was added called Audit Manager. Audit Manager essentially allows you to more readily manage audit and compliance of workloads running within your AWS account. You essentially select the services and scope, the frameworks you wish to apply, such as PCI. And then what it will essentially do is collect evidence for you as much as it can with the stuff it knows from AWS, allow you to basically review and attest to it. And then at the end of your review period, generate a report showing that you've done that. And then finally, Macie, what I call V2, has been added. So Macie, essentially a service designed to scan your S3 buckets for content that may be PII or PHI. Was really released as a V2, which provided significant price reduction and additional capabilities. And then finally, on the DevOps side, AWS added a new service called Proton. Proton essentially does almost what you could say Elastic Beanstalk did for serverless and type apps. So essentially providing developers a platform with which to run their apps without having to get into the details and the nuances of the infra behind it. What I call the gurus, so both Code Guru and DevOps Guru. So Code Guru, some additional capabilities were added. Python support for Code Guru Reviewer, which basically reviews your code, makes recommendations around things like security, performance optimization. And then memory profiling support for Code Profiler. So now you could actually analyze your snapshots of your stack. Java at this point to understand where memory consumption is going. And then DevOps Guru, the most recently added service, essentially leverages AI to look at the data emitted by your various services, load balancers, EC2, etc., and correlate certain events and make recommendations. So think of it like auto-configure your CloudWatch alarms for you. The fault injection simulator, which essentially allows you to do chaos-type engineering exercises against your workload or app. Cloud Shell, which I'd call essentially I need to quickly pull up a shell without launching an EC2 instance. So it's literally available in the top right hand of your console. It takes less than a minute to launch, and provides you essentially that, a Linux-based shell. And then support for Grafana and Prometheus as AWS services, and then OpenTelemetry we covered on a previous slide. So final slide. So a lot of really cool services, right? But one of the things that I think is also pretty neat is the vast multitude of resources AWS provides from a learning and best practices perspective. So some really cool ones were added specifically for SaaS at reInvent. So SaaS Boost is basically a reference architecture. If you have a SaaS app you're building, this helps sort of bootstrap a lot of those common things you need to think about, auth, payment integration, etc. SaaS Lens, which is basically an extension of the well-architected framework geared towards SaaS-based applications. Similar to that, foundational technical review lens. So this is kind of a baseline review that you may perform, as sort of a readiness assessment for your app. And then two great just reference sources of documentation. SaaS Factory Insights Hub just gives you insights into sort of best practices at running large-scale SaaS implementations. Things like tenancy, monitoring, entitlements, quota management, and the like. And then the Builders Library, which it basically has practical guidance and advice written by the people that have built and operate AWS services. So that's essentially it. I actually managed to jam it in under an hour, which was amazing. Again, the great thing about virtual reInvent is literally available to anyone with internet and some kind of computing device. I think just recently, I was checking earlier today, a lot of the videos and presentations have been posted. So you could kind of go back and refer to things. AWS every year basically has like more or less a listing of everything added, which is a great source of information. And yeah, that's about it. Anyone have any questions or feedback?
Hey, Patrick, Sheldon White here. How you doing? Long time.
Hey, how you been?
Hey, pretty good, pretty good. Yeah, I just put a little comment there. Great review. Let me know when you test the voice ID and the WSP, and then we can reconnect again, maybe at the next meetup. Be great.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. We're in the preview for the voice ID, and our mutual friends are on the WSP stuff now. So
cool. Say hello to all my friends out there in Cloudhesive.
I will, for sure. Thank you.
All right.
Some great questions. Thanks, Sheldon.
Cool.
So I think the fact that you mentioned the Lambda being 1 millisecond granularity, that's been a real cost saver, especially because they want to look at sort of position Lambda for like an alternative for Kubernetes. That's the way that they want to project. So I think they're shaping up to be the solution for that. So thank you for pointing it out.
Oh yeah, no, it's pretty amazing. I think it's when you get into compute versus containers versus functions, it's definitely very philosophical. It's a political or religious conversation, right? But just sort of what's great is AWS isn't necessarily forcing one direction or the other, right? All sort of three approaches kind of are equally favored children. I think that there's just some of the really cool things, right? Even like I said, with compute, that continue to evolve is pretty cool.
Yeah. I think with EKS Anywhere, they want to get into this hybrid computing, but then that's easier said than done. Like there are a lot of feedback that Andrew Jesse mentioned, that they're getting a lot of people who have EKS on-prem, Docker's on-prem, and they were like, how do I connect through? and I think they're trying to serve this EKS anywhere as a conduit to do that hybrid computing.
Yeah, I just saw it the other day. There is actually a product out there someone came up with, and the name escapes me. But you could basically take the small form factor Raspberry Pis, the ones that look like an old Sim, and stick like 5, 6, whatever, 8 of them in a case, and literally bootstrap them. Run the ECS or EKS agent on it, and literally have like a local container farm, which again, is cool from a kind of hobbyist perspective, but likely also has some practical applications, again in the edge computing space.
Yeah, thank you.
Sure. So yeah, we will post. I saw a few other questions here. We will post a copy of this deck and the recording to both our SlideShare and YouTube sites. We'll post those links in the meetup page. And then as far as cost reduction goes, I can't think of any significant like EC2 based cost reductions from last year. What I'll say though is as new types of instances and storage types are introduced, they tend to play a bit of a factor in what you can do from a cost and pricing perspective. Again, savings plans generally pretty mature. I think that was a 2019 announcement where you could commit. Some capabilities were added as far as what is in scope. So Fargate and Lambda functions are in scope for savings plans, unlike RIs. And you can even pre-schedule the buy of savings plans. So if you're coming up for either renewal of your RIs or a growth event, don't necessarily want to lose sight or forget about it, you could schedule that out.
What would be interesting is to see is like how many features that they add are like effective, and what is the utilization rate of those features, and then just it would be interesting to see if there's any metrics associated with that.
Yeah, I can't say I've seen anything official. I mean, you definitely get a sense, right? Like, a new service comes out, and a lot of folks are pretty quick to share their opinions on it. Like, Honeycode is an example, which was basically that business app platform. Had some interesting feedback in the social space. And then there's other services like, again, Amazon Connect. I dedicated 2 slides to it just because it's a lot of sort of new services that maybe fall out of what might be perceived the expected pattern, somewhat have a bit of a slower ramp up, right? They're stable and usable and functional from day one, just delivered as an MVP. And then as sort of year 1, year 2, year 3 passes, that's where we start to see a lot of the new features and capabilities added. At least that's sort of been our observation with Connect.
Yeah, what you're saying is it may not be evident in the first year, but it will soon have more details.
Yeah, for sure. I mean and that's kind of the some of the really interesting stuff is, you have AWS has a service like Cloud Search, right? Cloud Search is I'd say definitely an older and mature service offered by AWS. I think it's sort of predated Elasticsearch. It's based on Lucene, whereas Elasticsearch is also based on Lucene. So I think given the choice, a lot of folks are probably going to go the direction of Elasticsearch, but there are still folks out there that are using Cloud Search. And as a matter of fact, some of the not as popular announcements last year actually dealt with adding new instance types to to cloud search, right? So even a service that, maybe isn't necessarily like the first place someone looks or goes, but folks are still using, AWS continues to develop and add features and capabilities around.
Yeah, yeah.
Cool. So I thought one idea here is, we want to pick up the momentum, and try to get these on somewhat of an ongoing cadence, especially until we can all kind of get back to meetups in person. So soon after this, we're going to get our next month topic scheduled out, where we're going to focus on security. And so we want to talk about a little bit about some of the stuff you could do on Amazon from a ransomware incident response perspective. Specifically around some of the best practices you could do for end user computing, like workspaces, and helping manage some of that. And then really a refresher. We did one of these sessions a few years ago about modernizing security on AWS. So there's 8 great key services AWS offers around security, and it's basically a baseline for any new account. Things like GuardDuty, CloudTrail, Security Hub, Detective, all that great stuff, right? So really, what we find is it helps to go back, periodically look at how you've defined the security within your AWS accounts, and make use of these great services. So yeah, that's next month's topic. But as always, anyone has any ideas, suggestions of things they'd either like to present or see presented, or even try different formats and agendas, please definitely let us know. All right, so that's essentially it. Unless anyone has any other questions, we'll go ahead and wrap the meetup up. Alrighty. Thanks so much, everyone, and thanks for joining, attending, participating, engaging, and enjoy your evenings.
Thanks, Patrick.